polished floor of JFK's Terminal 4 reflected 1,000 stories of hurried goodbyes and anxious hellos. But on that crisp September morning, it was about to reflect a collision of two worlds. For one man, Dr. Samuel Adebayo, it was the start of a journey to deliver a keynote speech that would define his career. For another, Transportation Security Officer Miller, it was just another Tuesday, another chance to exert the small power his uniform afforded him. Neither man knew that in less than 30 minutes, a silent, 100-foot-tall witness would pass judgment from above, turning a private moment of humiliation into a global spectacle of karmic justice. The air in the security line at John F. Kennedy International Airport was thick with the usual cocktail of recycled oxygen, stale coffee, and low-grade anxiety. Dr. Samuel Adebayo stood patiently, his leather messenger bag slung over a perfectly tailored blazer. He was a man accustomed to waiting, for code to compile, for venture capital to clear, for the world to catch up to his ideas. This, however, was a different kind of waiting. It was stagnant, unproductive, and laced with a subtle tension he had learned to recognize from 1,000 similar lines in 1,000 other airports. He was flying to London to deliver the keynote address at the World Future Innovators Conference. The invitation itself was a milestone, a recognition of his life's work. His company, Nexus Connect, had just launched its flagship product, a revolutionary platform designed to create transparent, secure communication networks for global enterprises. He was the architect, the visionary, the face of the company, a face that, at this moment, was just another face in the crowd. The line shuffled forward, laptops in bins, shoes off, pockets empty. The choreography of modern travel was a dance he knew well. He placed his carry-on, his messenger bag containing his laptop, and a small bin with his watch and phone onto the grey conveyor belt. He walked through the millimeter wave scanner, arms raised in the familiar gesture of surrender. No beep, no alarm. He was collecting his belongings on the other side when a voice cut through the din. "Sir, I need you to step over here." Samuel turned. The voice belonged to a transportation security officer whose name tag read Miller. Agent Miller was a man in his late 40s with a soft paunch that strained the buttons of his blue uniform shirt and a pair of eyes that seemed to hold a permanent, weary suspicion. He gestured with a latex-gloved hand toward a sterile, glass-walled cubicle set off to the side. "Is there a problem, officer?" Samuel asked, his voice calm and even. He made a point of being impeccably polite in these situations. Politeness was a shield. "Random additional screening," Miller said, the word random doing a lot of heavy lifting. "Please bring your bags." Samuel's gaze flickered around. He was the only black man in his immediate vicinity. An elderly white couple ahead of him had fumbled with their electronics, setting off a minor alarm, yet they were waved through with a patient smile. A group of boisterous college students behind him, loud and disorganized, were being herded along like cattle. The randomness, it seemed, was remarkably specific. He let out a quiet, internal sigh. He'd built a buffer into his schedule for this exact eventuality. It was a tax he had learned to pay. He picked up his bags and followed Miller to the screening area. "Place your bags on the table. Empty your pockets completely," Miller instructed, his tone flat and authoritative. Samuel complied, laying out his wallet, his keys, his phone. Miller picked up the wallet and began flipping through it, his thumb smudging the plastic over Samuel's driver's license. "Samuel Adebayo," Miller read aloud, his pronunciation mangling the Nigerian surname. "Where are you headed today, Mr. Adebayo?" "London," Samuel replied. "Business?" "What kind of business?" Miller's eyes scanned Samuel from head to toe, lingering on his expensive watch and the bespoke cut of his suit. It wasn't a look of admiration. It was a look of assessment, of suspicion, as if the pieces didn't fit the puzzle he had pre-assembled in his mind. "I'm a software architect. I'm speaking at a conference," Samuel said, keeping his answers short and direct. Miller grunted, a non-committal sound. He set the wallet down and turned his attention to the messenger bag. "I'm going to have to go through this." It wasn't a question. Samuel simply nodded. He watched as Miller's gloved hands, clumsy and uncaring, pulled out his laptop, his meticulously organized folders of presentation notes, a paperback novel, and a small, leather-bound journal. Miller opened the journal, his eyes scanning the pages of complex algorithms and flowcharts. "What's all this?" he asked, pointing a finger at a diagram. "Those are my work notes," Samuel said, a flicker of annoyance finally breaking through his composure. "They're proprietary." "Everything is subject to inspection, sir," Miller retorted, the "sir" now carrying a sarcastic edge. He flipped through another few pages, pretending to understand the intricate code, then tossed the journal back onto the table. He unzipped an inner pocket of the bag and pulled out a small, velvet pouch. He opened it, revealing a pair of antique silver cufflinks, a gift from his mentor when he earned his Ph.D. Miller tipped them into his palm, weighing them. "These look expensive," he commented. "They have sentimental value," Samuel said, his jaw tightening. The search continued, each item removed, examined, and set aside with a distinct lack of care. It was a performance of power, a deliberate act of delay and belittlement. Another officer, an older man named Jenkins with a tired but professional demeanor, walked by and glanced into the cubicle. "Everything all right, Miller?" Jenkins asked. "Just a random check, Dave," Miller replied, not looking up. "You know the drill." Jenkins lingered for a moment, his gaze falling on Samuel, then on the methodical disassembly of his life on the stainless steel table. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head and walked on. Samuel checked the time on the large terminal clock. 7:45 a.m. His flight, BA-112, boarded at 8:20 a.m. The buffer he had built in was rapidly evaporating. The humiliation was slowly being replaced by a hot spike of anxiety. This wasn't just an inconvenience anymore. It was a genuine threat to the most important presentation of his professional life. "Officer," Samuel said, his voice a fraction tighter. "I understand the need for security, but my flight begins boarding in 35 minutes. Is there anything specific you're looking for?" Miller stopped his slow, deliberate swabbing of Samuel's laptop and looked up, a faint smirk playing on his lips. It was the look of a man who had finally gotten the reaction he was hoping for. "Security procedures take as long as they take, sir," he said, drawing out the last word. "You should have arrived at the airport earlier if you were on a tight schedule." The injustice of the statement was galling. He had arrived 3 hours early, but arguing would be like throwing gasoline on a fire. He knew the rules of this game. He was to stand there, silent and compliant, and absorb the indignity until the man in the uniform was satisfied. So he closed his mouth, clasped his hands behind his back, and waited, a silent storm of frustration raging within him. The stainless steel table felt like an operating theater, and Samuel's belongings were being dissected. Agent Miller, now seemingly emboldened by Samuel's quiet frustration, escalated the process from methodical to performatively invasive. He picked up Samuel's carry-on, a sleek, hard-shell suitcase, and unzipped it with a flourish. He began pulling out the contents. Neatly rolled shirts were unfurled, examined, and tossed into a growing pile on the table. A DOP kit was unzipped, its contents, toothbrush, cologne, travel-sized toiletries, spilled out and inspected one by one. He held up a bottle of aftershave, unscrewed the cap, and sniffed it with theatrical suspicion before placing it down with a clatter. Samuel stood motionless, his posture a study in forced composure. Inside, his mind was a maelstrom. He thought of the lines of code he'd written late into the night, the years of sacrifice, the missed dinners and sleepless weekends that had led to this keynote in London. He thought of the small team that depended on him, the investors who had bet on him, the quiet pride in his parents' voices when he'd told them about the invitation. All of that, every accomplishment, every late night, felt reduced to nothing in this sterile box, under the bored, accusatory gaze of Agent Miller. This was a familiar kind of powerlessness, but it never lost its sting. It was the feeling of being seen, not as a person, but as a composite of statistics and stereotypes. To Miller, he wasn't Dr. Samuel Adebayo, Ph.D. in computer science from MIT, CEO of a 9-figure tech company. He was a black man in expensive clothes, and in Miller's worldview, that equation produced a single, predetermined sum: suspicion. "I'm going to need you to remove your shoes and your jacket, sir," Miller said, his eyes still fixed on the suitcase. Samuel had already removed his shoes to go through the main scanner. They were sitting in the bin. Miller was asking him to do it again, here. It was a petty assertion of dominance. Silently, Samuel slipped off his blazer, folded it carefully, and placed it on the only clear corner of the table. He stood in his crisp white shirt and socks. Miller paused his search of the bag and ran a chemical swab over Samuel's hands, his belt, and the waistband of his trousers. He inserted the swab into a whirring machine. Samuel held his breath, not out of fear of what it would find, but out of sheer, unadulterated anger at the charade. The machine beeped. Negative. Of course it was negative. Miller showed no reaction. He simply turned back to the suitcase. He reached the bottom layer, where Samuel had packed the custom-made presentation clicker and a set of noise-cancelling headphones. Miller picked up the clicker, a sleek, metallic device. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "It's a remote for my presentation," Samuel explained, the exhaustion audible in his voice. "A PowerPoint clicker." Miller turned it over and over in his hands, as if it were an alien artifact. He clicked the buttons, aiming it at the wall. Nothing happened. He looked at Samuel as if he were lying. "We'll need to run this through the X-ray again. Separately," he declared, placing it in a new bin. The clock on the wall now read 8:05 a.m. Boarding would have started. A cold dread began to seep into Samuel's stomach. He could feel the opportunity, the culmination of years of work, slipping through his fingers because of this man's arbitrary cruelty. "Officer," he tried again, his voice dangerously low. "My gate is at the far end of the terminal. I am the keynote speaker. If I miss this flight..." "Everyone's got somewhere important to be." Miller cut him off, not even bothering to look at him. "You're not special." The phrase hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "You're not special." It was the core tenet of this entire exercise. The goal was to strip away his identity, his accomplishments, to remind him that here, in this box, he was nothing more than a potential threat, a body to be processed. Officer Jenkins reappeared, his walkie-talkie crackling. He stood at the entrance of the cubicle. "Miller, what's the hold-up here? We've got a surge at checkpoint Bravo." "Just finishing up a thorough screening, Dave," Miller said, emphasizing the word thorough. He began with excruciating slowness to swab the inside of Samuel's now empty suitcase. Jenkins looked at the chaotic pile of Samuel's belongings, then at Samuel's face, a stoic mask that couldn't quite hide the fury in his eyes. He looked at the clock. "This man has been here for over 20 minutes, Miller. Did you find anything?" "Can't be too careful," Miller mumbled, a defensive edge to his tone. "Did. You find anything? Jenkins repeated, his patience clearly gone. No, but then pack his things and let him go. Now, Jenkins commanded. His voice was quiet, but it carried the unmistakable weight of a direct order from a superior. Miller's face flushed a blotchy red. He had been overruled, his little kingdom of the stainless steel table invaded. He shot a venomous glare at Samuel, a look that said, "This isn't over." He didn't pack the bags. He simply gestured to the mountain of personal effects. "You're free to go, sir. You can pack your things." The final indignity. He had to reassemble his life from the chaos Miller had created under the ticking pressure of the clock. With frantic, yet precise movements, Samuel began stuffing his clothes back into the suitcase. He rolled his shirts, paired his socks, placed his toiletries back in the dop kit. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a potent cocktail of rage and adrenaline. He zipped the suitcase, shoved his laptop and journal into his messenger bag, and slipped his feet back into his shoes. He didn't have time to properly refold his blazer. He just draped it over his arm. As he grabbed his belongings, his eyes met Miller's one last time. There was no apology in the officer's gaze, no remorse. There was only a sullen, resentful satisfaction. Miller had won. He had made Samuel sweat, had made him feel small, and had almost certainly made him miss his flight. Samuel offered no parting words. There was nothing to say. He turned and strode out of the screening area, his heart pounding against his ribs. Not even a thank you or a goodbye for the man who had just stolen 40 minutes of his life. The time was 8:17 a.m. Final call for boarding would be in 3 minutes. His gate, B34, was a lifetime away. He broke into a run. The terminal was a blur of faces and flashing signs. Samuel ran, his messenger bag thumping against his hip, the wheels of his carry-on rattling a frantic rhythm against the polished floor. He dodged slow-walking families and business travelers engrossed in their phones. Every footstep was a count against the dwindling seconds. Gate B34. It was always the last gate, at the very end of the concourse. His lungs burned. A sheen of sweat slicked his forehead. The perfectly composed man from the security line was gone, replaced by a desperate traveler sprinting against the clock. He risked a glance at a monitor as he passed. BA-112. London LHR. Gate B34. Final call. The red letters flashed like a warning siren. He rounded a final corner and saw it. The jet bridge for gate B34. The gate agents were there, one speaking into a walkie-talkie, the other preparing to close the door. "Wait! Please!" Samuel yelled, his voice hoarse. The gate agent looked up, her expression a mixture of pity and professional duty. "Sir, we're closed." "Please!" he gasped, leaning against the counter, trying to catch his breath. "I'm Dr. Adebayo. I'm the keynote speaker at the conference this flight is sponsored by. They're waiting for me." He fumbled for his ticket and passport. The agent looked at his credentials, then at her screen. She bit her lip, hesitating. Her colleague shook her head. "We can't, Maria. We'll miss our slot." "Just 1 minute," Samuel pleaded. "I was held up in security. It wasn't my fault." His plea was raw, stripped of all pretense. In that moment, he was no longer a CEO or a tech genius. He was just a man begging not to have his world upended by a bureaucratic whim. Maria looked from his desperate face to the still open door of the jet bridge. She seemed to see the truth of his story, the genuine panic in his eyes. With a sigh, she nodded to her colleague. "Okay, go. Run. We'll call the cabin." A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees washed over him. "Thank you," he breathed, snatching his documents. "Thank you so much." He hurried down the jet bridge, the final passenger to board. As he stepped onto the plane, The flight attendant gave him a tight, professional smile and pointed him toward his seat in business class. He found his seat, 4A, and collapsed into it, his body trembling with residual adrenaline. He had made it. By the skin of his teeth, he had made it. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Samuel finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. The anger and humiliation from the security screening came rushing back, no longer diluted by the panic of missing his flight. He thought of Miller's smug face, the casual cruelty, the complete lack of accountability. A deep, cold anger settled in his chest. The plane taxied toward the runway, passing by the grand, sweeping glass facade of Terminal 4. Samuel stared out the window, his mind replaying the entire incident. He saw the concourse below, the ant-like figures of travelers rushing to their gates. And then he saw it. It dominated the view, a colossal digital billboard mounted on the terminal's exterior, visible to every plane on the tarmac and every car on the approach road. The ad was on a loop, cycling through luxury cars and expensive watches. And then the screen went dark for a second before a new image faded in. It was a face, a confident, smiling, professional face. His face. Below the massive portrait, in clean, minimalist font, were the words, Nexus Connect, Dr. Samuel Adebayo, Chief Architect. The future is transparent. He stared, dumbfounded. The international ad campaign. It had been scheduled to launch today. His marketing chief, Jessica, had told him it would be big, but he hadn't grasped the scale. He certainly hadn't expected this. His own face, 40 feet high, plastered on the very building where he had just been treated like a common criminal. The irony was so staggering, so profoundly absurd, that he let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound devoid of humor, a sound of pure disbelief. The future is transparent. The slogan mocked him. His life's work was built on the principle of clarity, of breaking down barriers. Yet he had just been subjected to the most opaque and prejudiced of human interactions. From his window, he had a direct line of sight back toward the security checkpoint area. He couldn't see individuals, of course, but he could see the glass-walled cubicles. He pictured Agent Miller in there, perhaps starting his break, grabbing a coffee, completely oblivious. But he was wrong. Back inside the terminal, Officer Jenkins was walking his patrol when his radio crackled. "Dave, you need to see this. The big screen outside." Jenkins walked toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the tarmac. He followed the gaze of a small crowd of travelers who had gathered, their phones out, pointing and murmuring. He looked up at the billboard. His blood ran cold. There, on the screen, was the face of the man his subordinate had just spent 40 minutes harassing. Dr. Samuel Adebayo, Chief Architect. Jenkins turned and stormed back towards the screening area. He found Miller wiping down the stainless steel table in the secondary screening cubicle, whistling softly. "Miller," Jenkins said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Yeah, Dave?" Miller asked, not turning around. "Come with me. There's something I need you to see." Confused, Miller followed Jenkins back to the large windows. Jenkins didn't say a word. He just pointed. Miller looked up. His eyes widened. The color drained from his face. He stared at the giant image of Dr. Samuel Adebayo, the confident smile, the powerful title. He looked from the billboard back to the now empty screening cubicle, the scene of his petty tyranny. The dots connected in his mind with the force of a physical blow. The man he had arbitrarily detained, the man he had belittled and treated as less than, the man he had accused of not being special, was, in fact, so significant that his face was the first thing millions of people saw when they arrived at one of the world's busiest airports. A young woman standing nearby, a vlogger named Chloe, with a keen eye for drama, had been discreetly filming the tail end of Samuel's frantic run to the gate. Now she panned her camera from the stunned, horrified face of Agent Miller up to the colossal billboard, then back again. She had just captured the silent, perfect punchline to a story of injustice, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that it was going to go viral. Aboard British Airways Flight 112, cruising at 35,000 feet, Samuel Adebayo was disconnected from the world. He had switched his phone to airplane mode before takeoff. The image of his own billboard seared into his mind. The initial shock had subsided, replaced by a cold, calculated resolve. The incident with Agent Miller was no longer a personal slight to be swallowed and forgotten. It was an event, an intersection of injustice and irony so potent it felt like a mandate for action. He declined the champagne service, instead asking for a bottle of water and his laptop. He connected to the plane's spotty Wi-Fi, the connection painfully slow, a thin straw to the digital world. His first action was to draft an email, not to his family, not to his team, but to Jessica Albright, the ferocious, whip-smart head of public relations for Nexus Connect. Subject: urgent. Incident at JFK Jess. Something happened at JFK Security this morning. I was pulled for a random secondary screening that was anything but. It was a clear-cut case of profiling. The agent in question, an Officer Miller, was deliberately obstructive and unprofessional. He delayed me for nearly 40 minutes, and I almost missed the flight. The only reason I'm on this plane is due to the kindness of a gate agent. Here's the kicker. As we were taxiing, I saw the new billboard on Terminal 4, the one with my face on it. I'm not sure what happens next, but this feels significant. I have the officer's name. I want to file a formal complaint with the TSA and the Department of Homeland Security. I also think we need to get ahead of this from a company perspective. I'll be in the air and largely unreachable for the next 6 hours. Can you start drafting a potential statement? Let's be prepared. This isn't just about me. This is about what Nexus Connect stands for. Transparency, right? Talk soon, Samuel. He hit send, the email vanishing into the digital ether. He felt a measure of control return. He was no longer just the victim. He was setting the wheels of a response in motion. Back on the ground, that response was already careening out of his control. Chloe, the vlogger, had found a quiet spot near her gate, her heart pounding with the thrill of a great scoop. She quickly edited the footage on her phone. She started with the shot of Samuel, sprinting for his gate, a look of pure desperation on his face. She cut to the stunned, pale face of Agent Miller, then dramatically panned up to the massive billboard. She layered on a simple, powerful text overlay. JFK Security profiled this man. Then his billboard showed up on their building. She chose a trending, dramatic audio clip and added a few hashtags. JFK profiling, .TSA, current karma, .black travel. She titled the video Instant Karma at the Airport and posted it to TikTok, Instagram Reels, and Twitter. The internet's algorithm, a mysterious beast that feasts on conflict and irony, immediately seized upon the video. The first 10 minutes saw a few hundred views, then 1,000. Then it was shared by a mid-level influencer with 500,000 followers. From there, it exploded. The video was a perfect, self-contained narrative of injustice and comeuppance. It was short, visually arresting, and emotionally resonant. People weren't just watching, they were reacting. The comment section became a torrent of outrage and dark humor. The TSA agent picked the one guy he shouldn't have. That slogan, "The future is transparent," is the chef's kiss. I hope this Dr. Adebayo sues them into the ground. This is what profiling looks like. and this is what karma looks like. Meanwhile, at the security checkpoint, Officer Dave Jenkins had pulled Agent Miller into a small, windowless break room. "What the hell was that, Frank?" Jenkins demanded, his voice low and furious. "I've told you before about your random checks. I've told you to stick to procedure." Miller was still pale, his usual bluster completely gone. He sank onto a plastic chair. I didn't know. How could I know who he was?" "That's the entire point," Jenkins shot back, jabbing a finger in his direction. "It's not supposed to matter who he is. Whether he's a CEO or a plumber, you treat him with respect, and you follow the damn protocol. You don't get to play God with a swabbing stick because you don't like the look of someone." Miller mumbled. "He looked suspicious. He looked like a successful black man, and that's what you couldn't handle," Jenkins said, cutting through the excuse with surgical precision. "I saw the whole thing. You were enjoying it. Now, thanks to you and that Billboard, the whole world is about to see it too." Jenkins's walkie-talkie crackled. It was the shift supervisor. "Jenkins, Miller, my office. Now, Port Authority police are on their way down." Miller looked up, his eyes wide with genuine fear. "Police? Why?" "Because," Jenkins said, his face grim, "this isn't just an internal matter anymore. You didn't just harass a passenger, Frank. You just embarrassed the entire Transportation Security Administration on a global stage." At the Nexus Connect headquarters in Silicon Valley, Jessica Albright's phone buzzed with a notification from their media monitoring service. The spike in mentions was astronomical. She clicked the link and Chloe's video filled her screen. She watched it once, then a second time, a cold dread mixing with a surge of protective fury. Her CEO, her friend, had been subjected to this. Then Samuel's email landed in her inbox. She read it, her resolve hardening. Samuel wanted to file a complaint. That was good, but Jessica knew this was already far beyond a formal complaint. This was a 5-alarm PR crisis for the TSA and a defining brand moment for Nexus Connect. She immediately picked up the phone and dialed the company's chief counsel. "Robert," she said, her voice tight with urgency, "we have a situation, a very big one. Clear your afternoon." Across the Atlantic, Samuel Adebayo's flight continued its journey, a metal tube of blissful ignorance soaring above an internet that was rapidly catching fire with his name and face. He had planted a seed of action, unaware that a forest was already growing in his wake. While Samuel slept fitfully somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, the story of his encounter at JFK achieved a velocity all its own. Chloe's video was no longer just a viral clip. It had become a news event. By the time the sun was rising over the green fields of Ireland, Master JFK Justice and Author TSA Miller were the top 2 trending topics on Twitter in North America. Major news outlets, initially alerted by the social media storm, had begun their own reporting. Journalists descended on JFK, trying to get a comment from the TSA, whose press office was in full-blown crisis mode. The initial statement was a textbook example of bureaucratic deflection. The Transportation Security Administration is aware of a video circulating on social media. We are committed to ensuring all passengers are treated with dignity and respect. The incident is currently under review. This bland response only fueled the fire. The public, armed with the damning visual evidence of the video, saw it as an admission of guilt. At Nexus Connect, Jessica Albright was orchestrating a masterclass in crisis management. After conferring with the legal team and the company's CEO, Robert Chen, she crafted a statement that was the polar opposite of the TSA's. It was sharp, supportive, and perfectly aligned with their brand identity. She posted it across all of Nexus Connect's official channels. Nexus Connect stands with our chief architect, Dr. Samuel Adebayo. The treatment he endured at JFK this morning is unacceptable and antithetical to the principles of transparency and equality we champion. Profiling has no place in our society, whether in an airport or in the digital world. We will be supporting Dr. Adebayo in any and all actions he chooses to take to seek accountability. The future must be transparent, and that transparency begins with demanding justice in the present. The statement was a gut punch to the TSA and a rallying cry for the public. It reframed the narrative. Nexus Connect wasn't just a company whose executive was a victim, it was a company actively fighting on his behalf. Mentions of their stock, NXC, began appearing in financial news segments discussing the incident. Commentators noted the brand authenticity of their response, contrasting it sharply with the TSA's evasiveness. In a strange twist of market logic, the incident was starting to look good for Nexus Connect's public image. In a quiet suburban home in Queens, Frank Miller sat at his kitchen table, the television muted, his world shrinking to the hellish glow of his smartphone screen. He had been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. His union representative had called, sounding less than optimistic. He scrolled through the thousands of comments, each one a digital stone cast in his direction. Strangers were dissecting his character, calling him a racist, a bully, a small man with a big ego. They had found his photo from a local newspaper article about a charity drive years ago. His face was now a meme, juxtaposed with the smiling, confident face of Dr. Adebayo from the Billboard. His wife, Brenda, came into the room, her face etched with worry. "Frank, turn it off. You're torturing yourself." "They're destroying me," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It was just a random search. I was doing my job." "Was it random, Frank?" she asked softly, her eyes pleading with him to be honest for once. "Was it really?" He didn't answer. He just stared at the screen, at the global storm he had unleashed with one simple, prejudiced decision. He had wanted to make one man feel small, and in doing so had made himself the object of worldwide scorn. When British Airways Flight 112 touched down at Heathrow Airport, Samuel Adebayo switched his phone off airplane mode. He was expecting a reply from Jessica. He was not prepared for what happened next. His phone exploded. It vibrated so intensely it felt like it might shatter in his hand. Hundreds of notifications flooded his screen. Texts from friends, family, and colleagues he hadn't heard from in years. Dozens of missed calls. A tidal wave of alerts from news apps, Twitter, and LinkedIn. His heart hammered in his chest. He clicked on the first link he saw, a BBC News alert. US tech executive profiled at JFK Airport. Incident goes viral ahead of London conference. He scrolled through the article, his eyes wide with disbelief. He saw screenshots from Chloe's video, his own panicked face, Miller's stunned expression, the billboard. He read Jessica's powerful statement from Nexus Connect. He saw his name and his story being debated by politicians and civil rights leaders. In the span of a 7-hour flight, his private humiliation had become a public crusade. He was no longer just Samuel Adebayo, passenger. He was Dr. Samuel Adebayo, a symbol. As he walked through the arrivals hall at Heathrow, a driver was waiting for him, holding a sign with his name. But there were others waiting, too. A small group of reporters and photographers, alerted to his arrival, had gathered. "Dr. Adebayo, Dr. Adebayo, do you have a comment on the situation at JFK? Will you be taking legal action against the TSA? How does it feel to have your company's billboard become part of the story?" Samuel was momentarily stunned into silence. He had intended to fight this battle quietly through formal channels, but the world had other plans. He took a deep breath, straightened his blazer, and walked toward the flashing cameras. He would not hide. He would not be a passive symbol. If the world was watching, he would give them something to see. He stopped in front of the reporters, his expression calm and resolute. "What happened at JFK was not an isolated incident," he began, his voice clear and steady, carrying across the arrivals hall. "It is a symptom of a systemic problem. I was fortunate that my story had a dramatic and visible postscript. Most victims of profiling do not. They suffer in silence. This is no longer just about me. It is about every person who has been unjustly targeted and made to feel powerless. As for my plans, I will be pursuing this through all available channels. The future, as my company believes, must be transparent, and we will bring transparency to this." He gave a firm nod, then moved past the reporters toward his car, leaving a flurry of activity in his wake. The storm had not broken him. It had forged him into lightning. The internal investigation at the Department of Homeland Security was swift and severe. The viral nature of the incident, combined with the powerful response from Nexus Connect and the personal statement from Dr. Adebayo at Heathrow, had transformed a personnel issue into a full-blown public relations catastrophe. The case was handed to a senior investigator from the Office of Professional Responsibility, a woman known for her meticulous, no-nonsense approach, Agent Maria Donovan. Agent Donovan was not impressed by titles or public opinion. Her world was one of facts, procedures, and patterns. She started with the official report filed by Officer Jenkins immediately after the incident. It was concise and damning, noting Miller's deviation from standard, random selection protocols and his unnecessarily prolonged and confrontational search. Her next step was to pull Frank Miller's complete personnel file. She sat in her sterile Arlington office, the thick manila folder open on her desk. Miller's record was not, on the surface, terrible. He had received satisfactory performance reviews for most of his 12-year career. But Donovan was trained to look in the margins. She found what she was looking for in the complaint history. Over the past 5 years, 7 informal complaints had been lodged against Miller for overly aggressive or targeted screening. All 7 complainants were men of color, 4 black, 2 Hispanic, 1 Middle Eastern. All 7 cases had been dismissed by previous supervisors as unsubstantiated, with Miller's defense being that he was simply following his instincts and being extra vigilant. To Donovan, this wasn't a series of isolated incidents. It was a clear, undeniable pattern. Miller wasn't extra vigilant. He was a predator who used the shield of his authority to harass individuals based on his personal biases. The previous supervisors had failed to see the pattern, or worse, had chosen to ignore it. The case of Dr. Adebayo wasn't an anomaly. It was the moment Miller's pattern had spectacularly backfired. Donovan requested the full, unedited CCTV footage from every camera angle at the JFK checkpoint. She watched the entire 40-minute encounter. The video was silent, but it spoke volumes. She saw Miller single out Samuel from the line. She saw the dismissive way he handled Samuel's belongings, the way he postured and delayed. She saw Jenkins's visible discomfort and his eventual intervention. Most importantly, she saw no legitimate security reason for any of it. There was no suspicious behavior from Samuel, no anomaly on the initial scan, nothing to warrant the level of scrutiny Miller had applied. Her interview with Officer David Jenkins was the next crucial piece. Jenkins sat across from her in a small, secure interview room at JFK, looking tired and older than his years. "Dave, I've read your report," Donovan began, her tone professional but firm. "I want you to tell me, in your own words, what you observed." Jenkins recounted the events, his voice heavy with a mixture of professional regret and personal frustration. "I've worked with Frank for 8 years," he said. "He's always been zealous, pushes the envelope. I've told him to tone it down, that his instincts were going to get him in trouble. "Did you ever file a formal report about these instincts before the Adebayo incident?" Donovan asked, her pen poised over her notepad. Jenkins hesitated, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. "No, I'd talk to him. Tell him to knock it off. I'd tell our supervisor, but it never went further than that. You know how it is. You try to handle things in-house. You don't want to jam up a colleague." "And now?" Donovan pressed. "Now I see that was a mistake," Jenkins admitted, his voice low. "I enabled him. We all did. Every time we looked the other way, we told him it was okay. That guy, Dr. Adebayo, he was just the unlucky one who got caught in the gears. Or maybe," he added, looking up at Donovan, "he was the lucky one. He had a 100-foot-tall billboard to back him up. What about the other guys who didn't?" It was a question that hung in the air, a summary of the entire case. The final interview was with Frank Miller himself. He arrived with his union representative, a portly, sweating man who advised him to keep his answers short. Miller was a shadow of his former self. His uniform was immaculate, but his face was drawn and sallow, the swagger replaced by a twitchy, defensive energy. Donovan walked him through the events of that morning, step by step, her questions precise and relentless. "Officer Miller, what specific behavior from Dr. Adebayo led you to select him for secondary screening?" He seemed nervous. He was dressed too well. The expensive watch. It felt out of place," Miller stammered. "Out of place for whom, officer?" Donovan asked, her gaze unwavering. "The government-issued BOLO reports list suspicious behaviors, furtive glances, unusual bulges in clothing, signs of recent surgery. Is wearing a nice watch on that list?" "No, but my training allows for officer discretion." "Your training requires you to articulate a reasonable suspicion based on observable behaviors, not personal biases," Donovan corrected him. "Let's move on. You tested his hands for explosives residue. The test was negative. Why did you then proceed to manually search every single item in his luggage?" "Standard procedure for a comprehensive search. The procedure is to cease the search once the suspicion has been reasonably dismissed," she countered, her voice like ice. "You had no suspicion to begin with, and every test you conducted confirmed there was no threat. Yet you continued. Why did you feel the need to open his personal journal?" "To check for hidden compartments or coded messages." The excuse sounded weak even to his own ears. "Are you trained in cryptology, Officer Miller?" "No." "Then what, precisely, were you looking for?" Miller had no answer. He just stared at the table. The foundation of his defense, that he was just doing his job, was being systematically demolished, brick by brick. Donovan had exposed his actions for what they were, not security, but harassment, not procedure, but prejudice. She closed her folder. "Thank you for your time, Officer Miller." The union rep started to speak, but Donovan held up a hand. "My recommendation to the board will be submitted by the end of the day." As Frank Miller left the room, he knew his career was over. The investigation hadn't been about the video or the media pressure. It had been about the cold, hard facts of his own actions, a pattern of behavior that had finally caught up to him in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. He hadn't been undone by a celebrity or a CEO. He had been undone by his own reflection, exposed by the transparency he so desperately sought to deny others. The official notification came via a sterile, impersonal email from Human Resources a week later. Frank Miller's employment with the Transportation Security Administration was terminated, effective immediately. The reason cited was gross misconduct and failure to adhere to established screening protocols, resulting in a significant breach of public trust. The news, when it broke, was a brief, satisfying conclusion for the millions who had followed the story. For Frank, it was the beginning of a freefall. The job hadn't just been a paycheck, it had been his identity. For 12 years he had been Officer Miller. He had worn a uniform, carried authority, and seen himself as a guardian at the gates, a protector against unseen threats. Now, he was just Frank Miller, an unemployed 48-year-old man from Queens whose face was a meme for bigotry. His attempts to find new work were a nightmare. The incident was so high profile that his name was now toxic. He applied for a position with a private security firm. The HR manager recognized his name instantly. The interview was short. He applied for a job as a security guard at a local mall. He was rejected. Even a position driving an armored truck was a non-starter. The company couldn't risk the liability. The digital ghost of his actions at JFK haunted him, closing every door before he could even knock. His friendships, mostly forged within the TSA, evaporated. His old colleagues were polite but distant. They had their own careers to protect. Associating with him was a risk. The man who had once been part of a brotherhood was now an outcast, a cautionary tale whispered in break rooms. Don't pull a Miller. The financial strain was immediate. Brenda, his wife, had to pick up extra shifts as a nurse. The tension in their small home became a constant, suffocating presence. One evening, he found her crying at the kitchen table, a pile of unpaid bills in front of her. "What are we going to do, Frank?" she sobbed. "This is all because you couldn't just let it go. You had to be the big man. You had to push him. I was doing my job," he yelled, the words hollow and reflexive. "No, you weren't," she fired back, her grief turning to anger. "You were being a bully. I've seen you do it for years, Frank. The way you talk about people at the airport, the names you call them. I warned you. I told you that hate would rot you from the inside out. Now look at us. Look at what it's done." He had no response. Her words struck with the brutal force of truth. He retreated to the living room and, against his better judgment, opened his laptop. He found a news segment about Dr. Samuel Adebayo. While Miller's world was imploding, Samuel's was expanding in ways he had never anticipated. His keynote speech at the London conference had been a triumph. He had started by addressing the elephant in the room. "I arrived in London this morning after a memorable journey," he'd said to the packed auditorium, a wry smile on his face. It served as a powerful reminder of what we are all working against. My field is technology, but my passion is connection. And true connection is impossible in a world of opaque systems, hidden biases, and arbitrary authority. Whether that authority is a prejudiced algorithm or a prejudiced security agent, the result is the same. It creates barriers, it erodes trust, and it stifles human potential. He had woven the experience into the fabric of his speech, transforming a personal slight into a universal metaphor for the work they were all trying to do. The speech received a thunderous standing ovation and was quoted in tech journals and news articles around the world. He was no longer just a brilliant software architect. He was a thought leader, a powerful voice at the intersection of technology, ethics, and civil rights. Watching the clip, a strange, bitter envy coiled in Frank Miller's gut. He saw Adebayo moving with grace and purpose, fated by colleagues, his reputation enhanced by the very event that had destroyed Miller's. He saw a man whose life was ascending, while his own was in a nosedive. Karma, he realized, wasn't just a single lightning strike of retribution. It was a slow, grinding calculus of consequences. It wasn't just losing his job. It was the loss of his identity, the respect of his wife, the friendship of his colleagues, the possibility of a future. It was being forced to sit in the darkness of his living room and watch the man he tried to diminish become magnified to the entire world. He closed the laptop, the silence of the house pressing in on him. He was left with nothing but the wreckage of his choices and the stark, unbearable clarity of what he had become. The power he had wielded so carelessly was a phantom, and the man he had seen as a target was now a titan, his success a constant, towering reminder of Miller's own spectacular failure. The billboard was gone from the terminal wall, but for Frank Miller, it would play on a loop in his mind for the rest of his life. 3 months passed. The winter chill began to settle over New York City. The news cycle had moved on, as it always does, to other outrages and other spectacles. But the impact of that September morning at JFK continued to reverberate, not as a fleeting headline, but as the foundation for something new and lasting. Dr. Samuel Adebayo returned to the United States not just as the successful CEO of Nexus Connect, but as an unwilling yet determined public figure. He had been inundated with offers, book deals, speaking engagements, invitations to join advisory boards. He accepted very few, wary of his story being commercialized into a simple tale of revenge. For him, the outcome for Frank Miller was not a victory. It was a sad, necessary consequence. The true victory would be ensuring that no one else had to rely on a coincidental billboard to have their dignity recognized. Instead of writing a book, he took action. He convened a meeting at the Nexus Connect headquarters. In the room were Jessica Albright, his head of PR, Robert Chen, the CEO, the company's top legal counsel, and 2 new faces, lead attorneys from the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU. "Thank you all for coming," Samuel began, standing before a large whiteboard. "What happened to me at JFK was a personal ordeal, but it exposed a systemic vulnerability. The entire incident was one man's word against another's, and it only became a major issue because of a viral video and a very large advertisement. Most victims don't have that. Their complaints disappear into a bureaucratic black hole." He picked up a marker. "So, my question is this. How can we use our resources and our technology to change that? How do we build a system that champions the transparency we preach?" The energy in the room was electric. For the next 2 hours, they brainstormed. They talked about using Nexus Connect's secure platform to create a new tool. The idea began to take shape. A free, encrypted mobile application developed in partnership with the ACLU, tentatively codenamed Project Guardian. The app would allow travelers to safely and discreetly document incidents of profiling. It would have a one-touch audio recording feature that would automatically upload to a secure server. It would allow users to instantly file a time-stamped, geolocated report directly to the DHS Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, as well as to the ACLU, creating a dual-track record that couldn't be easily dismissed or lost. It would also provide users with a clear, concise summary of their rights during a security screening. It was ambitious, powerful, and a perfect extension of the Nexus Connect brand. Robert Chen, the CEO, didn't hesitate. He pledged a multi-million-dollar grant from the company's foundation to fund the development and a long-term partnership with the ACLU. A month later, Samuel stood at a podium at a press conference in Washington, D.C., the Capitol Dome visible behind him. He was flanked by the director of the ACLU. "Today we are announcing a new initiative," Samuel said, his voice ringing with conviction. "An initiative born from a moment of indignity, but aimed at a future of dignity. We are building a tool that will put power back into the hands of the people. It will not solve the problem of prejudice, but it will shine a light on it. It will provide the data, the evidence, and the voice for those who have been silenced. The announcement made national news. This time, the story wasn't about a confrontation. It was about a solution. Samuel had successfully channeled the public's outrage and his own anger into a constructive, tangible force for change. He had taken the worst aspects of his experience, the feeling of powerlessness, the lack of transparency, the abuse of authority, and architected a system designed to counteract them. Far away, in Queens, Frank Miller saw the press conference on a small television in the corner of a diner where he was drinking a cup of coffee he could barely afford. He watched the man he had tried to humiliate, speaking with poise and power, announcing a project that would forever stand as a monument to Miller's own failure. He saw that Samuel Adebayo hadn't just won. He had transformed the entire game. He had taken the ugliness of one man's prejudice and used it as the raw material to build something that would help thousands. Miller paid for his coffee and walked out into the cold afternoon air. He was a ghost in his own city, a footnote in a story that was no longer about him. The ultimate karma, he finally understood, wasn't punishment. It was irrelevance. It was being left behind to watch as the person you tried to tear down uses the very stones you threw to build an empire. The story of Dr. Samuel Adebayo and Agent Miller isn't just a perfect tale of instant karma. It's a powerful reminder that in our hyper-connected world, there are no small actions. A single moment of prejudice, designed to happen in the sterile anonymity of a security line, became a global headline because of a silent, digital witness. It shows us that the fight for justice doesn't always end with an apology or a punishment. Sometimes it ends with the creation of something new, something better. Dr. Adebayo used his platform not for revenge, but for reform, turning his humiliation into a tool that could protect countless others. His story proves that the most powerful response to darkness isn't to curse it, but to build a brighter light. If this story resonated with you, and you believe in the power of turning moments of injustice into movements for change, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more true stories about accountability and justice in the digital age. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.